Good morning. How is everybody this morning? Cold. It is cold, isn't it? It's very cold. Yeah, yeah. It's a little chilly, all right. It's a lot chilly. Yeah. Oh man. All right. Do we have any announcements that we need to make that we don't know about? I think I've given them to Jay. I gave Loretta to Jay, so he'll announce that. Just be sure and listen to the announcements. Jay has a couple more that, well, they're not listening to me right now either. So, why, yeah, why are you different? Why are you special? Genesis chapter 31, beginning in verse 22. Good to see you this morning. Hope you had a great week. Jacob, in our story, Genesis, Jacob has left, or as we closed out last week, had left Laban, and Rachel had decided to take some of the idols of the family, and there's 2-3 theories as to why that was so important. One was that these idols were considered by some, or have been considered by some of the archaeologists have said, that if you possessed them, then you had the inheritance rights. In other words, everything that the family then inherited came to you. There's some shaky evidence with regards to that. We do know that idols with regards to what folks had in their homes in biblical times, they still believed them. They still held to them. There was still divination and acts done with them. But it's so sad to see a story, to see Jacob's story, to see a man that, yes, you can say, well, he deceived his brother and therefore he should receive deception, some would say. Well, he did. And Laban deceived him, and he ended up having to stay, or did stay, about 20 years in Laban's care and Laban's work. But he decided to leave, and Jacob is pursued by Laban. And that's where we are today. In Genesis 31, verse 22, it says, Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. So Jacob's got a good head start. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook them in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban, the Syrian, in a dream by night and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob, neither good nor bad. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you've stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? It's interesting because Laban's like all the rest of us, and we're like Laban. Somebody does something to us. What do? We try to get the upper hand. And so, why have you done this? You've taken my daughters away from me. He says, for I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. We might have had a party before you left. Why did you not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now you've done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm, but God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob, neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you sell my gods? I contend that this is really the reason he's mad. He's not really mad because his daughters have left, his grandchildren have left. He's not mad because Jacob really has left. But you see, here's the real problem. You've taken my gods. You've taken my idols. You've taken everything that goes with them. All the power. Because think about it. Laban probably still isn't a God-fearer. Because did you notice, even though God spoke to him, did you notice how he told Jacob? He said, but the God of your father spoke to me last night. It's not our God, my God, it's your God. And so while, you might say, I don't see that as being the reason he's angry, that's fine. And that's just my opinion, and that's all that it is. But it is interesting that how he tries to get the upper hand. Look, why did you go? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? Why did you take my daughters? Why did you take my grandchildren? We'd have had a party. We'd have had a big feast. We'd have had a big send-off. And so he's trying to get the upper hand. But Jacob gives his reasons for leaving quietly. He said to Laban, because I was afraid. For I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. So we don't know the exact relationship that Laban and Jacob had. Now, it seems as if you recall last week in our story as we read it, that Laban considered Jacob a good worker. And now all of a sudden, Jacob says, I was afraid of you. I was afraid what you might do, and I was afraid of your power. You might take your daughters from me by force. And then verse 32, with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So, Jacob didn't know. But he says, hey, why don't you just take and we'll even take the life of the individual that has taken them. They shouldn't live, and you should take back what's yours. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and to Leah's tent and to the two maids' tent, but did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of woman is with me. And he searched, but he did not find the household idols. So she, you could say, well, she's lying. Okay. Well, she's hiding them. She's sitting on them. She doesn't want to be found out. Why? Well, her husband's already said, don't let them live. You take what's yours, but the person that takes this, let's don't let them live. And so, verse 36, Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. Why? Because Laban hadn't found what he's looking for. He hadn't found his gods. Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you've searched all my things, what part of my household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young. I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by the beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I've served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you've changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. Jacob doesn't take any gruff, does he? Jacob unloads. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes when folks throw mud at you, it's best just to take it and move on. But Jacob doesn't. He replies. His reply is hot. First of all, he wants to know what's his sin. Not only does he ask what is his sin, he says, what have you found that's mine? Let's set this out. Let's let all the people judge. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's figure out what's happened. But then he recalls, he says, I want you to remember this. He said, I served you for your daughters. in our agreement, 14 years. I served 6 years, and I got now of the best of got part of your flock. Yes, but it's because I served you. Not only that, but you got to remember, he says, you got to remember, Laban, he says that you changed my wages. You didn't treat me right. I spent countless hours with your flock. I took care of them. I worked hard, you might say, is what he said. And so he gives a defense of himself. Well, you might say, well, he's justified. Yeah, we like to defend ourselves. We don't like for people to bring up reports and things and tell things on us and talk about us and talk about us out of time and when they shouldn't be talking about us. Nevertheless, Laban is going to discuss with Jacob a truce. But I do think it's interesting. And I think that it's worth noting for all of us. And that's verse 42. Jacob says, the reason that I've made it as far as I made it is because of the care of God. The reason that I survived all that I incurred while serving you was because of God. Not because of me, not because of you, but because of God. It's a great lesson there for really all of us that we can say, you know, we're at the point that we are, no matter what it is, but because of the hand of God. And we've survived what we have survived because of the hand of God. God's been good to us. God takes care of us. Anything else? Pretty straightforward part of the lesson. But notice the truce. Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, let's make agreement, let's make a truce, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Notice how Laban sees all of this. Laban still sees all of this as his, which would imply that Laban sees the relationship as what? Master-servant relationship. He doesn't see it as a son-in-law relationship, family relationship. This is mine, and you've taken it from me. Even though they've had the agreement. They had the agreement about the daughters. They had the agreement about the flocks. Laban still sees it as his. And so Jacob is willing to enter into agreement or covenant. The New King James Version uses the word covenant, verse 44, which is just simply an agreement. And so Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jagar Shadaduth, which just which means heap of witness. Yeah, heap of witness. But Jacob called it Gilead, and Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore, its name was called Gilead. Just simply means witness. Also, Mizpah, which has the idea of watchful, watch. It's really was a monument. A lot of folks believe, archaeologists believe, it's a monument to suspicion and fear, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. So there's an agreement. It's in many ways, it's almost, I think you could say, really, it's more like a truce. The eating might seem strange because they've basically made this truce. Don't do anything to my daughters, so forth and so on. But then they sit down to eat. Well, not really. That's sort of the gentleman's way of the agreement being kept This is, in other words, we would think about, you got to have a big ceremony, you got to sign things, an agreement, or there's a handshake and that seals the agreement. Well, in ancient times, you sat down to a meal. That sealed the agreement. So I don't know what they cooked, don't know what they ate as far as what was in a meal like that, but maybe it was fried chicken. I don't know. But they sat down and ate. And it says, then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, called his brethren to eat bread, and they ate bread, stayed all night on the mountain, and early in the morning Laban arose, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Sort of, you see the end really of the story. You don't see Laban anymore. This is the end of us seeing Laban. We'll still see Jacob, because Jacob and Esau will get back together. But this is the end of Laban. This is the end of time. Now think about it. And remember, this will help you, not that you don't remember it, but just as a refresher. Jacob had left. Jacob had, if you will, fooled his brother, got the birthright, went away because his mama had sent him away, went to Laban, who was kinfolks. For 20 years he worked, married Rachel and Leah, amassed a small fortune by virtue of an agreement, and now is ready to go back home. And so there is this truce made, and it's really the point, like I say, we don't see Laban again, but part of that is that here's this pillar of rock. You're not going to come any farther to me to do harm towards me, and I'm not going to come this way to do any harm towards you. So this was really a kiss goodbye. This was it. And so in many ways you say, well, it's a sad ending. Can you imagine not getting to see your grandchildren? No, I can't. And maybe you can't either, probably, if you have grandchildren. But Laban sends them off. And so there is this agreement. The mounding of rocks was a common practice. There were monuments that were all over the landscape. There were wells that were dug. Those were monuments. There were pillars of rocks that would be established. Those would be reminders. Here I raise my Ebenezer, we hear in a song, is the idea really of a rock or rocks. And those were put there as reminders. When you'd see those, you would remember what happened. And there would probably be some kind of special marking maybe on the rock or on the pile of rocks. So this is the agreement. Great lessons with regards to treating people. How do you treat people? Treat people fairly, treat them honestly. This is God's call for us. The fact that God delivered, as Jacob said, God delivered me, and we need to remember that. That's a great lesson. Anything else? Yeah. Isn't it interesting? My feeling is this. Isn't it interesting? The idea of don't say anything good or bad, it depends on who's judging, who's saying it, whether it's, if you're saying that wasn't good or bad. If you're receiving that's pretty harsh words, So, yeah, it's all in the eye that you're viewing it from. And isn't that true in life? Isn't that true in life? Oh, I didn't say anything bad. Well, no, you just raked me over the coals, So, good point. Anything else? Well, all right. Well, Esau comes to meet Jacob. Now, remember, as you do, that Esau is the oldest. Esau was the one tricked out. or tricked and lost his birthright, although he had sold it. Let's be honest. Let's be fair to Jacob in this deal. That Esau had sold it for a bowl of soup, if you will. And so there's going to come a time now, we've elapsed 20 years at least, and so Esau is going to come to meet Jacob. When the brothers parted, though, when Jacob left 20 years ago, Esau was the one plotting to kill his brother, right? And so it's kind of interesting how folks come back together. And it reminds us, and I want you to see a parallel as we read, especially the first 20, 21 verses. I want you to see the parallel of how and what should happen when two people, for whatever reason, become estranged. What should happen? You might say, well, preacher, that's found in Matthew 18. It is. And it's going to be found a little later when we talk, and we'll talk really more extensively about it when we talk about the story of Joseph and his brothers and how they become estranged. But here's two people that are estranged brothers, and let's see what happens. Let's see the story. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of the place Mahanaim, which means double camp. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I've dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." Here's this reconciliation that's about to take place. And here, if you will, Jacob, sending messengers to Esau, is proclaiming his return, his wealth, and his want to reconcile. I don't know about you, and once again, it's through the prism that you see this, but there's almost the tooting of a little horn here. I've got wealth. I'm coming back. And so, see what happens. The messengers return to Jacob, saying, "We've come to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. What's going to happen? Why is he bringing 400 men? Is he afraid of me? Is he afraid that I'm going to do something? Or is he still after me? Is he still wanting to kill me? Is he still wanting to take my life? Is he still wanting to cause me harm? And so it says Jacob was afraid and he was distressed. He divided the people that were with him, the flocks and the herds and the camel, into two companies. And in many ways, from a strategic point of view, this is really a smart thing to do. Because he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company, which is left, will escape. You know, one of the hard things for parents that have more than one child is when their children get to be about 16, do you let all the other children ride with them as they're driving? I know of a family. Matter of fact, Suzanne still talks to the wife. The father and I, we coached baseball together when our kids were little. They have 4 boys now, but they had 3 and one little bitty one at the time. But they had 3 boys. And when the oldest one became 16, the mother would not let all of the boys ride with the oldest one, even though he was out driving and fairly good driver, it seemed like, because the mother said, I don't want something to happen to all of them at the same time. That seemed to be pretty good wisdom to me at that point. It still does in many ways. But here, Jacob is dividing his family just for that reason. He says if Esau comes and he's going to take one company, he can't get both. Which gives you some insight into a thought that there is a great divide. In other words, these folks aren't like 100 yards apart. There's some distance between them. Jacob then, in verse 9, offers up a prayer. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal with you. I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. So here's Jacob's prayer. He starts out by addressing God. God of Abraham, God of Father Isaac. And then he, if you will, reminds God of what God has told him. You know, we all struggle with the idea of what to put in prayer, right? What should we say? What should we ask? How should we say it? How should we ask? There's a lot of struggles with prayer. I heard Matt Cook talk about prayer this past week in the lectureship that I was in, and Matt made the statement. He said prayer's hard, and I thought, I'm glad to hear somebody else admit that, because prayer is hard. And there are these questions that come to mind. What do we say? How do we say it? Did we say it the right way? And so it's interesting that in part of our prayers, do we remind God? I heard a preacher once say, I've heard, he was preaching a meeting. He said, I've heard men, as they stand up to pray in the assembly, they quote Scripture as if God has forgotten the Scripture. Well, there is a sense in which we can pray the Scriptures, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in March when we have a series on Sunday nights on prayer. But isn't it interesting, the first thing that he does, or one of the first things that he does, is he says, you said this to me. So he reminds God of what the promise was. The second thing that happens in this prayer is he proclaims his own humility. Verse 10. Which, have you found out this in your life? I'm sure you have. The most humble of people do not claim to be the most humble of people, right? If you're humble, you're not going to have to tell anybody. We know it. We know it. But he proclaims his humility. I'm not worthy. But then he says in his request, verse 11, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. And then I think he has a legitimate reason. He says, I fear him. I'm afraid that he's going to come, he's going to attack me. And then he says in verse 12, he says, you said, he reminds God again of the blessing. And he says, you said, and you said it's going to all be all right. And so his prayer kind of comes full circle, doesn't it? Does anything anybody like to add to that prayer? Yes. Sure. Yeah. Forgive us, Lord. As you've said, forgive. And especially do we need that. And there's nothing wrong with reminding God. Not at all. And there's really, that preacher that condemned, if you will, prayers, quoting Scripture, I'm not sure that that's a worthy condemnation. I will say this. in an assembly in which I was in, or I had preached, a man stood up to lead the closing prayer. And I knew the congregation, knew full well the man. And this was an older man. And I still to this day don't know what he had reference to. I think I do. But he got up, and in his prayer, as he was leading it, it was a very lengthy dismissal prayer. But he began as we would a normal public prayer. And then he got into it. And he said, Lord, he said, if we see a lady at work tomorrow. Now, this man was fully retired, had been retired for years, but his son was not. He said, if we see a lady at work and she looks nice, let's not talk to her. Let's not get involved. And he went through this huge, long scenario, which led me to believe that his son, who had affairs in times past, was probably in the midst of one that I didn't know, but he knew. And it was a sermon. And it was a sermon completely directed towards his son. I don't think that was the time or the place. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have talked to his son. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have had a prayer for his son. But there is a sense of appropriateness. This seems to be a very appropriate prayer for the time. A little bit on the ego side. A little bit wanting to remind God, but I don't see anything wrong with reminding God. Anything else? So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau, his brother. So he's going to send some presents. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. Now, what does that tell you? A lot of wealth, right? Wealth in that day was not how much you had in the Bank of Jerusalem. And stock market wasn't around at that time. It was what you had in stock, in animals. And so if this is just a present, he's not giving away everything he has. So he's done quite well. He delivered them to the hand of his servants. Every drove by itself and said to his servants, pass over before me and put some distance between successive droves. In other words, you got, if you will, you think about all these different types of animals. You've got to sort of herd them along. But he says, okay, you group them, but I want distance between them. What does that make it appear? A whole lot bigger, right? It's big already. You look at all these animals, but it makes it a whole lot bigger. And so he says, let's put some distance between them. And he commanded the first one, saying, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you will say, they are your servants, Jacob's. This is a present. It's a present sent to my Lord Esau. And behold, he is also behind us. So he commanded the second and third and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with present that goes before him, and afterwards I will send his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. So he stays behind, sends his servants, sends the present to his brothers, singular. Let's appeal, or let's squash the animosity that might be there. Let's make him feel better towards me. Suzanne and I adapted the philosophy a long time ago that a lot of times when I go visiting to speak somewhere, I usually take somebody something. And part of that is so that they'll say, oh, well, he was a nice guy. Preaching not much, but he's a nice guy. Well, this was a present, just simply put, to appease his brother because he knew of, 20 years ago when I left home, it wasn't that great. Anything else? So it reminds us, doesn't it? It reminds us in many ways of maybe how reconciliation should be made. Now, like I say, we're going to talk more about that when we talk about Joseph and his brothers. Forgiveness, at least on that end. But here's reconciliation. Okay, well, let's go. Let's make the first move. Let's make the first move. Not only let's make the first move, but let's pray about it. We've made the first move. We're praying about this because this is something that is of utmost importance to us, and we're gonna make this truth such that we're gonna give gifts, presents. To maybe this will kind of soothe over some of the wounds. Maybe this will help form the scabs, or maybe this will just cover over the scabs, and this will help get us all on equal basis. This will help us become friendlier. And it reminds us really that we shouldn't have enemies, but when we have them, we should try to reconcile with them. And how we go about it is of utmost importance. Yeah. Better. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. I think there is guilt here. Yeah, I see it myself, and that's sort of the appeasement of what he's doing. He's giving back. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. This is a peace offering of all kinds of nature. He's just trying he's trying to feel out. I'm so glad that my sister and I have a really good relationship. And I can't imagine after years if we had fussed and fought. Of course, there was nothing to fuss and fight over. But if there had been something that, years later, and brothers and sisters do fuss and fight. I think I shared with you the fact my mama and papa had 6 children. By the time my mama had passed away, 5 were still alive. And the first thing she had in her will was don't fight. That was the first order of business. Now, there really wasn't anything to divide it. There was a house to sell, but that was about it. And but she said, don't fight. That was pretty good advice. And it doesn't hold true in a lot of families. And here would be an example. Anything else?
It makes me think about Jacob got the blessing, but he didn't get any material things because he blessed with nothing.
Yeah.
So Esau actually got all the cattle and whatever they had.
He at least for that period of time had opportunity to the blessings from the standpoint they were there because he was still there. But by rights, they weren't his. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
But you're right. No, you're right. I'm agreeing with you. You're right. He still, but they weren't his, but he still, because he was there and Jacob had fled, he still had the advantage of them being there and him being there in his presence.
And if he was coming with 400 men, he must have been quite wealthy.
Yeah. 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 Because you don't trick 400 guys into believing what you're saying.
No. And I figured those were servants.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree with you from a standpoint of while he's there, it's carry you back to the prodigal son. And remember that you have the old son, or the son that stays, the oldest, and when the youngest comes back, he becomes the critic. And the father reminds him, he says, while you were not here, wasn't all this yours? You didn't do anything with it. Why are you grumpy now?
Esau actually stayed there, though.
Yeah.
It seems that, like when Jacob left, that Esau said, well, you sent him away over here to get a wife. I'll just go somewhere else to get my wife.
Yeah. Yeah. The question then becomes, did he go off, or did he just go off and get her and come back? So, yeah. Anything else? All good.
And it doesn't seem like getting a wife when you want to.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. I'm sorry, Pat. No, I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's true. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think so. No, he didn't. I could tell. He did scoot down before he said that. No, he was not. I saw him help you with your coat. He loves you. It's so evident in what I see that he does. His words are one thing and his actions are completely different. Oh, man. Anything else? I hate to get into the story. Think about, let's go at it this way. We're going to stop right here just because of the bell. George is going to ring the bell here in a minute. But this wrestling with God, this is interesting because we look at this, and we'll talk more about it next week. But we look at this, and here are the questions that come to my mind. Maybe not yours, but to my mind. Why is this in there? Why did it happen? And what's it supposed to teach us? Now, personally, and I'll just go on and tip my hat because I want you to kind of think about this as you think about and read over it maybe this week, is that God is humbling his servant. And with God humbling his servant, we have to look at this and say, how does God humble me? And not only how, because that answer comes real easy, Hebrews chapter 12. But when has God humbled me? And has God really humbled me? Now, those are questions to consider. And those are questions to think about. And it's something that I ask myself all the time. You may not. It is something I ask myself. But it's worthy of, I hope, your consideration. Anything else? Well, we'll start right there then next week. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day, for beautiful sunshine. We're thankful for your love for us and for the way that you watch over us and keep us. We're so thankful for opportunities to study your word, for classes and class time, thankful for your word itself and for what it means to us and how it directs our lives. We ask that you be with us, that you bless us and keep us, that we may always live with you and for you. Be with those that will be announced in our announcements in a few minutes. Be with them, bless them, and keep them. We ask that you watch over us all and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Y'all have a great, great week. Thank y'all.